For 30 years, Johnny Carson was the undisputed late-night king. From 1962 through 1992, he occupied The Tonight Show's legendary desk, televising into millions of homes 5 nights a week. With his Midwestern affability, impeccable timing, quick wit, and even his carefree golf swing, Carson was not only a TV host, but a cultural icon. He was America's evening companion during periods of social turmoil, technological upheaval, and changes in entertainment paradigms. But despite all the intimacy that viewers experienced with him, the individual himself was persistently out of reach. Carson was notoriously close-mouthed, a man who raised a nearly impenetrable wall between the carefully crafted personality of Johnny Carson entertainer and Johnny Carson, the actual multidimensional human being who liked to keep to himself, confided in only a few people, and only occasionally shared his innermost feelings. As his producer for many years, Fred de Cordova, once put it, Johnny created a character called Johnny Carson that he played on television. The actual man was far more introspective, occasionally gloomy, and extremely picky about whom he admitted. If this kind of story touches your heart, if you're someone who cares about truth, responsibility, and speaking up for the voiceless, please like this video, subscribe to our channel, and share it with someone who should hear it. Let's get started. This selectivity carried over to practically every aspect of his life, and The Tonight Show was no different. During his iconic 30-year tenure, Carson sat down with an estimated 22,000 guests. Politicians, film actors, athletes, musicians, writers, comedians, pretty much every prominent figure in American popular culture eventually made it across his stage. But only a small percentage of those visitors were paid more than Carson's professional courtesy. To most, he was gracious, suave, and immaculately in command, never revealing his true feelings. But with an occasional handful of people, something changed. He leaned forward, the glint in his eye intensified, and his laughter came more naturally. These were Johnny's guests, the privileged few who were able to break through the screen between the television personality and the man himself. Carson's last words to some of these beloved visitors, spoken on the air, whispered in a back room, or recalled by employees, are a stunning portrait in and of themselves. Not only do they tell us what he appreciated in others, but also what he appreciated about himself: professionalism, integrity, craftsmanship, humility, and the bravery to be honest when the moment actually called for it. Consider Bob Hope, for instance. Hope was a product of an earlier era of comedy, a vaudeville veteran whose quick-witted one-liners, foreign USO tours, and years of appearances in public had established him as one of the most popular entertainers in America. Carson worshipped him growing up, and always accorded him the public respect owing to a trailblazer. However, their relationship in private was complicated. By the 1970s and 80s, Hope's segments increasingly depended on cue cards and written gags, a style that conflicted with Carson's more relaxed, improv-based manner. To Johnny, Hope sometimes seemed stifling, a reminder of a bygone era no longer consonant with the frenetic pace of late-night TV. Carson's professionalism never wavered nonetheless. During Hope's last appearance, viewers witnessed only warmth and appreciation. Behind the scenes, Carson allegedly put out his hand and said, "Thanks for everything, Bob. You never missed, ever." It was classic Carson. Recognizing Hope's endless preparation and dependability, paying respects to a man whose taste was perhaps old-fashioned but whose tradition was unassailable. That dichotomy between backstage reserve and open admiration was Johnny's philosophy. In a nutshell, he was free to disagree with a person's approach, but to praise their artistry in earnest. By contrast, Dean Martin unleashed a different Johnny. Martin's calm, easygoing image, his omnipresent cigarette and drink, and his refusal to be too serious about show business charmed Carson. Martin was loose, accidentally missing a chair, mumbling lines in his happy drunk role, or throwing off a segment with an aside. Other hosts might have objected, but Carson reveled. He admired Martin's irreverence, resented his freedom, and enjoyed the opportunity to play along. At Martin's final Tonight Show appearance, Carson told him, according to reports, "Don't change, Dino. The world needs at least one guy who never takes it seriously." It was an authentic farewell from one perfectionist to a man who lived as if perfection did not exist. Carson once confessed to a producer, "Dean's the only guest who makes me wish the show went longer." For a man with a reputation for watching the clock, that was perhaps the ultimate compliment. George Burns wielded another kind of authority over Carson, the power of a living legend. Burns was a direct connection to vaudeville, to the source itself of American comedy. Even in his 90s, he would half-walk onto Carson's stage with cigar in hand and timing still flawless. Carson idolized him, researching with great care for Burns's appearances, conducting the interviews almost like a student before a master. "George, you're the only guy I know who gets funnier every year," Carson said to him on his last appearance. Backstage later, he was quoted as saying that Burns made him think that age could be a joke and not an albatross. To Johnny, Burns was continuity and change, evidence that comedy could transcend generations if the artist had the discipline to continue generating material. Another giant who impressed Carson was Lucille Ball. When Lucy stepped onto the Tonight Show set, TV royalty met TV royalty. Both had revolutionized their medium, Ball in the sitcom, Carson in late night. Their chemistry was electric, rooted not in flirtation or rivalry, but in mutual respect. A cameraman once observed, "With Lucy, Johnny wasn't the host. He was a colleague." On her final visit, after the applause faded and the cameras stopped, Carson approached her backstage and said, "You're the real deal, Lucy. Always were." When Ball died in 1989, Carson violated one of his own dicta. In normal times, he kept his grief private, but for Lucy, he dedicated a segment to her memory, his voice shaking with emotion. It was one of the few times America caught a glimpse of Johnny Carson, not as a host, but as a man in mourning for a colleague he deeply loved. If Lucy were a cast member, Jack Benny was a teacher. Of all the performers, Benny most influenced Carson's style. His use of silence, his famous pauses, his ability to be the target of humor, all became the core of Carson's timing. Carson freely acknowledged that Benny was his greatest influence. On Benny's final Tonight Show appearance, Johnny's regard was close to boylike, his admiration astonishing. Offstage, he allegedly said to him, "You taught me how to listen." Carson used to say Benny taught him, "The pause is funnier than the punchline." With Benny, Carson wasn't merely paying tribute to a guest, he was celebrating the DNA of his own career. Burt Reynolds, on the other hand, was the ideal counterpoint to Carson's reserve. Their frivolous, on-air shenanigans, shaving cream fights, water battles, and constant teasing continue to rank as some of the show's most beloved moments. Reynolds knew the game, as Carson said, that the greatest television resulted from spontaneity, not canned promotion. "Don't ever quit coming back, Burt. I need somebody to keep me honest," Carson told Reynolds on his last visit. Reynolds possessed the extraordinary talent for getting past Carson's shield, for making him enter real surprise. In an image-based business like show business, Reynolds' ability to make fun of himself was precisely the sort of genuineness Johnny cherished most. Carol Burnett fell into this same category of genuineness. She was warm, funny, and completely free of pretense, turning every Tonight Show appearance into a creative collaboration and not just a publicity stop. Carson trusted her so much that he frequently gave up control, allowing her to engage with the audience, add on extra minutes, or even take over sections of the show. He once told Ed McMahon in confidence, "Carol brings sunshine to the stage." Following her final appearance, he was said to have informed her backstage, "If I could center a show around just one person, it would be you." Burnett was more than a guest to Carson. She was evidence that joy, when real, was the greatest form of entertainment. With Bob Newhart, Carson discovered something else, a mirror. The two men had a shared affection for understatement, deadpan reading, and the comedy of life's tiny absurdities. They communicated the same comic language, each comprehending the accuracy needed to make fun seem easy. To watch them talk was to hear jazz musicians jam in immaculate harmony. Offstage, their camaraderie strengthened, uncommon for Carson, out to golf matches and off-hour dinners. Carson, after Newhart's final Tonight Show appearance, reportedly said to him, "Nobody made it look easier, but I know how hard you worked." In those words, there was both respect and understanding, a nod that their mutual profession took huge amounts of restraint behind the facade of ease. And Jimmy Stewart. If there was one moment that encapsulated Carson's humanity on the national stage, it was Stewart's 1981 recitation of his poem for his dog, Bo. The plain lines, read in Stewart's stammering voice, cataloged the idiosyncrasies of a cherished golden retriever and the ache of his loss. Carson, the controller, the man who infrequently broke, began to weep. He said, only in a whisper, "Thanks for sharing this with me, Jimmy," but the break in his facade spoke volumes. Backstage later, he hugged Stewart and told him, "I'll never forget this. You just gave us something authentic." For viewers, the moment was indelible. For Carson, it was redemptive. It taught him that vulnerability, invoked sparingly, was more potent than any joke. Stewart, for his own unobtrusive humility and Midwestern reserve, had elicited from Johnny the sort of authenticity he spent a lifetime protecting. These 9 concluding conversations, Hope, Martin, Burns, Ball, Benny, Reynolds, Burnett, Newhart, and Stewart, inspire us about Johnny Carson more than thousands of refined interviews ever could. They illustrate his values: respect for professionalism, admiration for craftsmanship, appreciation for authenticity, and appreciation for joy and humility as the greatest art. Carson did not like fame in itself. He liked those who raised entertainment to a higher plane, be it by timing, warmth, spontaneity, or plain honesty. What makes these moments so touching is that they shattered the armor of America's most protected entertainer. For 3 decades, Carson permitted viewers to believe that they knew him, but revealed only the persona of himself he desired. But with these few visitors, the mask cracked, sometimes in humor, occasionally in awe, and once with Jimmy Stewart in tears. Those flashes reminded America that behind the polished host there existed a flesh-and-blood man, introspective, deliberate, and intensely human. Ultimately, Carson's finest asset wasn't so much his impeccable timing or unequaled interviewing ability. It was that sometimes cautiously and by design he would let his guard down, alerting us that connection, temporary as it might be, was the key to television being more than entertainment. It made television human. And in those last few words to his beloved guests, we see not only Johnny Carson the host, but Johnny Carson the human being, courteous, appreciative, quietly vulnerable, and most of all, authentic.